What's up, friends? Welcome back. My guest today is a naturopathic doctor. Now, to be totally honest, until we had our conversation, I had no idea what naturopathy was. But as you may expect from the name, it's a practice that focuses on non-invasive healing that treats the whole person, meaning mind, body, and spirit. I found her background and the modality she employs to help her patients extremely fascinating, and I'm sure you will too. Please welcome Dr. Sarita Cox. Dr. Cox, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me on the JAK'ed podcast. How are you today?
I'm good. It's a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me here. Glad to be here.
Oh, you have such a unique outlook. I've talked to a lot of different people since I've started this podcast from, vast areas of health and fitness and things of that nature. And, reading through your bio and some of the work that you've done and whatnot, it really, really intrigued me, your style of doing things. Now, you are a naturopathic doctor and a chiropractor, or not a chiropractor, but an acupuncturist. Is that correct?
You got it right.
Okay. Like I said, I talk to a lot of people. It's hard to keep them all straight. But the whole concept, like reading through your bio and whatnot, I'm like really fascinated. So what I need you to do to start things off is I need you to tell our audience how you got into the field of what I would almost like call it alternative medicine because it's not the norm. But how did you get involved in all that?
So the way it happened for me in my 20s, I was seeking and searching and trying to have a more balanced mental, emotional, physical health. And in Alabama in the early 90s, the offerings were very conventional Western medicine. So if you needed to do some psychological work, they would offer you antidepressants. And that just at that point in my 20s, choosing where I was navigating after basic undergraduate school, I felt like that prescription was simply a Band-Aid. And so I had healed a lot of my bothersome physical symptoms like food allergy. Well, I'm sorry, like environmental allergies with diet and homeopathy. So I was already on a path of more balancing and natural wellness approaches that I had just discovered. So when I wanted to do this next piece of my healing after that experience in my 20s, I really connected with the natural world. And after school in Alabama, I went out to Colorado and just absolutely fell in love with the West and the expanse that we see and feel in the Western landscape. And while I was there, I just really started to have deeper and deeper connection with experiences of nature in different geographical regions that I've been raised. And that healed a lot for me, getting very physically active in the natural world in the backcountry in Colorado, meeting people from all over the world, starting to world travel. And then after I had done a lot of traveling, I came back to Alabama in a bit of a crisis of faith and occupation. I had expanded myself and I had found a lot of ways to enjoy, but I hadn't found that thing that met me in the heart space about how to translate that into a way of right livelihood in the world. So at that point, I actually looked at a book. This was way, before the internet was really our information source. And it was a book called Peterson's Guide to Graduate and Professional Schools. And I looked at a profession that allowed me to be in medicine and continue my love of nutrition, learn more about homeopathy, also to start investigating the mechanisms of the ways that the body works at the cause level, and how
Mm-hmm.
symptoms are expressions of the wisdom of the body's imbalance. So I found a program on the West Coast, one in Portland and one in Seattle, that I felt were vetted schools for naturopathic medicine. And I
Right.
visited those schools. I felt like Portland, Oregon was going to be more of the right place for me. So
Mm-hmm.
I went back and did some sciences that I had not previously done, some statistics, these types of coursework. And then I made a travel and went to Portland, Oregon, and studied at National College of Naturopathic Medicine, which is now National University of National University of Health of NUNM of Natural Medicine. Sorry, they changed the name. When you get more than one program, the Department of Education then is calling you a university and not a college. So a little bit of
Oh, okay.
change there. So
Gotcha.
when I went there, I actually got introduced to Chinese medicine, because every
Mm-hmm.
program in naturopathic medicine has to take a year of a traditional wisdom, ancient healing introduction. And I was
Hmm.
very
Okay.
fortunate there to be exposed to classical Chinese medicine. So,
Okay.
what most of us know in the West is traditional Chinese medicine, and that's kind of post Mao Zedong's sterilized version in the
Mm-hmm.
1950s that was pushed out by China, that's very Western protocol y. But
Okay.
the program I learned was from the classical Chinese tradition. So we're looking more at Taoism and Confucianism and practices that are thousands of year old, that didn't expunge the spiritual part of Chinese medicine. So I
Okay.
really fell in love with Chinese medicine. And then I decided, fortunately, to stay a little
Mm-hmm.
bit longer, which has served me because my primary work in the South has been acupuncture. Whenever people come in for acupuncture, that is the door that's the most familiar. So, what we would say is this medicine, we like to say it's integrative. So,
Mm-hmm.
acupuncture is more integratable into the systems of Western medicine.
Okay.
So that's my entry point. And interestingly, my program was very heavy in Chinese herbs and qigong. Really,
Okay.
those were the mainstays. And I actually did apprentice work after my college with a traditional five element acupuncturist that I really respected, that had studied in England under Worsley, who was a founder of that tradition. And that's much
Mm-hmm.
more of an emotional, um, kind of it has a strong Western appeal because it deals with a lot of the issues that we have in our mental and emotional realms, not just the
Mm-hmm.
physical of acupuncture. So
Right.
that, got me to the place that I could really start practicing acupuncture as an effective modality, but felt I
Mm-hmm.
still needed the herbal medicine once things were in the organ level. So
Okay.
acupuncture is not going to clear digestive issues at the level of parasitic invasions or organ disruption,
Right.
but it's
Right.
going to help us in complementary build and generate energy in areas that have too little, to disperse energies that have too much, and to free flow those energy systems.
Okay.
So that is the acupuncture piece of it. And
Mm-hmm.
the other thing that's really influenced me, two more traditions. One is Ayurvedic medicine. So after my program at in Portland, I actually
Mm-hmm.
lived in an ashram and was part of a wellness center in the Ayurvedic tradition of medicine. And
Oh,
my
wow.
affinity with that was the body work. They know all
Mm-hmm.
about oilation, they know about the temperatures of oils, what they do for the body, how they calm the mind. And they're really, really great at detoxing the body in the system called panchakarma. So I
Okay.
learned the body work and ran a wellness center in Santa Cruz area for 3
Okay.
years. When I came
Hmm.
back here, I actually, the last 3 years, have been working with the Mississippi Band of the Choctaw Nation. So getting a little exposure to Native American healing traditions. What's still part of their culture, what's dying out, what just kind of a small insight to that over the last 3 years when I've been doing acupuncture on their reservation in Choctaw, Mississippi. So that's kind
Oh,
of a
okay.
little summary of the different styles of wisdom traditions that I've
Hmm.
been vibing with the last, during my career for the last 20 years.
That's awesome. So let me ask you real quick, because you were talking about, the classical Chinese medicine and acupuncture and all these other things, and then you brought up the work with the Native American medicine. Now,
Mhm.
how closely related would you say a lot of the fundamentals are, between like Native American medicine and Chinese medicine? Because I know some of the philosophies, from at least the little bit that I understand about it, are similar, and yet some of them are like worlds apart. What would you call a good comparison between the two? Where do they intersect and where do they differ?
Great question, John. Where they intersect, I think all these wisdom traditions intersect around our relationship to nature. And so
Okay.
when we're patterning, for example, in five element tradition, we're using a generative cycle of
Hmm.
the way things come round over time. It's like a circle of life. I would say that's one way I would look at wisdom traditions is they see the cycles in things. They know, for example, if you're on the top, then you're bound to be falling down toward the bottom to create another revolution of coming up again. And I
Okay.
think the conventional systems that we use are very linear thinking, that time is a linear element. So I would say the
Okay.
way that all the traditions I've seen are similar is their closeness to the elements or the directions or the beloveds, the respect for nature and our dynamic relationship with those.
Hmm.
Um, Chinese medicine is a little bit unique in that they were never conquered, and their history and lineages have so much written history. Whereas in the
Okay.
Native American tradition, it's strongly oral histories. In the Vedic,
Okay.
it's kind of a combination. So I would say the record keeping is where it's most different. But the
Okay.
philosophies are very close to source and cause. So in Native American medicine, we see a lot of, work with Great Spirit, the spirit of plants. In Chinese
Hmm.
medicine, it's a little bit more dissected. It's like where the spirit feels the body. It has an affinity to go into the body and to dry this herb dries. This herb goes to the kidneys. This herb goes
Okay.
to the eyes. So
Hmm.
there's more of a reduction, but I would say that the dynamic force, the changing forces is similar across all cultures. Also, with those cultures, you're always checking in. Like,
Hmm.
we don't just take something and assign that you have a pathology at year one, and
Hmm.
then at year five, we're still on the same protocol. That's very modern wisdom,
Okay.
modern mechanisms. But I
Hmm.
think the place that we're all sharing in these wisdom traditions is our relationship to source, and then
Hmm.
our place between source and the manifestations of spirit in the natural world, whether they be our kindreds with plants, our kindreds with animals, our kindred with bodies of water. These are the
Hmm.
types of things that all the Aboriginal and traditional wisdoms share that makes them very cohesive.
This stuff interests me so much. I mean, when I first got involved in, trying to improve people's life through health and fitness, and taking a holistic approach, because I realized that the mind plays just as much into everything that goes on within the body, and how the mind is like the central part of it. It's like if one thing is out of kilter, everything can get all out of whack. And sometimes it's not just about what you eat or how much you exercise. It's other things that are going on inside you that can cause issues with your health. And when I talk to people like you, and I've talked to many people that differ in all different kinds of things, from just spiritual and energy healings to all different types of stuff. I just truly find it fascinating how you can find little pieces and little threads that just everything just kind of connects at some layer, and it's trying to understand that layer that is really, really fascinating to me.
It's that connectedness that we
Hmm.
see in traditional wisdoms, which is exactly what you're speaking, that we
Yeah.
are whole beings, right? And that
Hmm.
we're working on all these levels. Chinese medicine, we have a very important point that we use in the ear to calm people, and it's called
Hmm.
Shenmin. It's
Okay.
spirit gate. And when we try to translate that from the Chinese to the English, the word spirit and mind can't separate in that tradition. So
Mm.
when we say shin, and when we do a diagnostic, we look at the eyes and we look at the brightness or the life or the mental affect in the eyes. You can't separate spirit and mind in these traditional cultures, but we try to
Yeah.
reduce it. And I think we get in
Hmm.
trouble with the reductionist perspectives.
Yeah, it's just it's too easy to try to just say, okay, this is the problem, and this is what you have to treat to achieve the outcome. And I think that so much gets missed in that process. But now let me go back to what you were saying a few minutes ago. Now, a couple times when you were telling us about the differences, and your journey and whatnot, you talked about seasons. Now, to me, I think of seasons like spring, summer, winter, fall. To me, that's a cycle.
Mhm.
Like a year is a cycle. And I think that is something that a lot of people don't really pick up on. It's more than just the weather.
Yeah.
Our lives are a cycle. We start off as babies and we grow and we go through this cycle. And for those that believe in reincarnation and things like that, it's a cycle that continues. Um,
Yes.
how important is the seasons in and of itself? That whole concept. How important is that for you to be able to get across to the people that you work with, so that they truly understand what it is that they're going through?
So I think that that's the culmination right now of my life work, is
Mm.
really starting to help people realize that the journey is dynamic and that
Okay.
we're in a cycle that connects
Hmm.
us to ourselves, to the environment, to our communities. And I think when we start to understand the cycling, and I just think the seasonal cycling is the most apparent one. And I
Hmm.
think when we start recognizing that things happen in a cycle, and a return to source, a return to more natural rhythms,
Hmm.
we start losing a lot of the anxiety and fear in our life because we know it's not a direct trajectory. So during this kind of COVID craziness, I went and saw my accountant about my business. And, he said to me, my job is to get you to think linearly. And, I came back and I tried to process that. And what he doesn't account for is synchronicity and dynamism and the magic of life and what happens when we connect, that life isn't this like A to B thing, and medicine doesn't serve us when it's just the A to the B thing.
Hmm.
So I think when we start with where we are That's the only place we can start. And I believe the most accessible way to create a sustainable and maintainable journey of health is to
Mm-hmm.
start in the season we are, learn, engage, be inspired. All seasons have a beginning, a middle, and end. Then we're on to the next thing. We're transitioning. Beginning, middle,
Right.
end, transition. Beginning, middle, end,
Mm-hmm.
transition. And this is our
Right.
life. Yeah. We're at a certain phase in our life. That phase is going to have a beginning, a middle, and end, and then a transition. And so
Yeah.
I think one of the most immediate ways to empower ourselves around our health is to walk out the door and be engaged with the reality of what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
So the seasonal approaches, I really emphasize the earth element, which happens 4 times a year around the solstice and the equinox. These are
Okay.
times of transition. So basically, I use a seasonal model like, spring, summer, fall, winter. But
Mm-hmm.
within those, I honor the transitions between seasons.
Right.
That
Yeah.
helps us honor transition in general. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that's most important is our gut health. Trusting our gut, emotionally, caring for our gut in terms of its integrity and what cohabitates with us inside our intestines, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, our our returning to our self, our groundedness, our relationship with stewardship and caring for the earth. So
Mm-hmm.
every transition, these 18 days between the solstice and the equinox, it is so empowering to come back to the earth during our transitional times.
Hey guys, I just wanted to jump in here and make sure that you're enjoying the video. I'm sure you are. And if you like what I'm doing, please subscribe to the channel, click the bell, make sure you select the all feature so that way you get notified when new episodes of my podcast drop. And if you would, right up here in the top right hand corner of my channel where my links are, there's a Patreon link. If you guys could help out there, it'd grease the wheels to keep this thing moving, and I surely would appreciate it. Now, let's get back into the video. Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. So now, how would you say um, this whole thing with COVID and everything has affected people on that level? Because I fully agree with what you're saying. I mean, I live in the mountains of West Virginia. I prefer to live here because I prefer to have nature around me. I like to be able to step out on my back deck and I can maybe see the roof of the closest house to me, but it's like that's all I can see, and all I have birds and squirrels, and I have deer in my yard on a regular basis and things like that. Like
It's so
you
helpful. It's so
yeah,
healing,
yeah,
right? So
absolutely.
2 years ago, in response to the F5, F45 tornado in Tuscaloosa, Alabama in 2011,
Yeah. Hmm.
I lived in a old growth forest 4 miles from the university. So I
Okay.
still live in the same place, but when in 30 seconds, that power of Mother Gaia uh, completely swiped the property clean.
Hmm.
So it gave me a new canvas, and I created, and it's still in motion, a food forest. Because many of us in the South live in a food desert. Maybe it's
Right.
getting better, but being able to step outside our doors to connect with with Earth in real time,
Hmm.
I think that's, one possibly positive side of COVID is that many people sheltered in place. And you and I believe, were super blessed because our
Hmm.
sheltering in place is a microcosm of it's a respite, whether,
Yeah.
it's, the birds waking us up. And something as
Hmm.
simple waking up with the sunrise and then
Hmm.
winding down and getting off technology at sunset. These
Right.
types of watching the sunrise, watching the sunset gives us
Hmm.
a sense of beginning, middle, and end of things, that things
Yeah.
are always changing, but there
Hmm.
is some constant that we can plug into that rhythms us back to harmony and peace.
Yeah.
So I think what COVID on the positive side have done for people, it's a little timeout.
Yeah.
We People had to stop everything, and it gave them a lot of time to evaluate, right? And a
Hmm.
lot of people, especially the first couple of months, I think
Yeah.
that was a time when people started saying, wow, this is super important that I spend time with my family. Wow, I was
Hmm.
really running around in this on this busy, busy life, too busy of a life, doing a
Hmm.
lot of things that were unnecessary. And so I think the first couple of months gave people a timeout to allow themselves to evaluate what was
Hmm.
important. And
Right.
then I also think some craziness started happening, like cabin
Yeah.
fever, kind of, you know,
Hmm.
us on one level and then muzzling us on another level has
Right.
brought a really strange social experiment, in my opinion.
Hmm.
So I think that the initial pause that COVID gave us is the gift. And
Right.
hopefully we all take what we what we were able to do in a respite period, an
Hmm.
official timeout, and move forward with g- applied consciousness, applied awareness.
Hmm. Yeah. Yep. And I think it's going to be interesting to see when, like, I know some of the states and whatnot are starting to lift their bans and starting to open up back up and whatnot. I know here in West Virginia, they haven't lifted the state of emergency yet. I think that happens on July 1st or something like that. But I know that like some of the gyms are open again, and and things of that nature. But you're still, you're seeing lasting change that happened from all this. That it has affected the way that people think about things,
Yes.
and I truly think that, you know looking inward and dealing with mindfulness and things of that nature in the months and years that are to follow this whole thing, I think are really, really going to be important. So now,
Absolutely.
I want to talk to you about your element wisdom cards. I'm actually, I still haven't gotten around to, you sent me the test. I still haven't gotten around to taking the test yet, but I'm like really trying to do that. And I want to actually get my hands on some of these cards. But for all our listeners, can you explain to them what these cards are and what they do?
Yes, thank you so much for that opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just my right now process is we are in this transition period at the end of the summer solstice period. And these
Mm-hmm.
18 days are the time that I bring back into my world the classical wisdom, some of the classical teachings for each elemental season. And I have done this project in real time. So basically, the element wisdom cards are a set of cards, and I don't know if you can see this. Um, can you
There
see
they
that?
go. Yeah, I can see them. Yep.
All right. So it's basically, John, 73 unique and inspired messages for each season. And they are
Okay.
really the critical pearls from my practice. So these are the
Okay.
sayings I found myself as I got deeper into following the rhythms and natural rhythms and seasons of time, as we're experiencing it. I would feel people's pulses and they would have a seasonal effect to them. So
Okay.
I might feel a difference in the fire pulse or the heart pulse. And I would come back around, and every year I would feel that again during this time period. And I
Mm-hmm.
started realizing also with my herbal prescriptions, I do a lot of custom formulations. And when I would put a couple of herbs in for this season to moderate the effect, the external effect of the season, like heat, or the
Mm-hmm.
internal response to that season constitutionally, that my patients would do better. And the other
Okay.
thing I found is that if I evaluated my patients each season, we got much more rapid progress in their transformation. So I
Mm-hmm.
kind of, over the last 20 years, took my clinical experiences, what I said to people, how I observed people's responses, and I created 73 unique messages that allow people to have continuity of care outside of the office.
Okay.
So this season, coming up into summer, the
Mm-hmm.
summer is ruled by the fire element. And in Chinese medicine, that's actually four of our 12 meridian systems. It's the heart and its paired organ, the small intestine. It's also
Mm-hmm.
the triple warmer, which we could say is the thyroid or the immune system or the circulatory system, and the
Mm-hmm.
pericardium, which is the heart protector. And so these fire elements um, rule the summer. And I would say the theme is finding joy in what exists. The sound of the fire is ha, ha, like laughing, like ha,
Mm-hmm.
ha. So
Right.
I think the message for the summer, it's so interesting because this is the time of the year when people vacation. And I
Right.
think there's no coincidence about that. So it's
Right.
about how do we find our joy? How do we express joy? How do we connect with others in that joyful connectivity? It's about freedom. It's about,
Right.
road trips, and it's about fun.
Mm-hmm.
So the type of the thing that I'll come into this transitional period, and this will be the final deck. And when I do the summer deck, which will be written here in Alabama, printed in Mississippi, then I get those back and I put them into bags that are created in Georgia and hand stamped on the property, typically
Hmm.
with some botanical that's in season. And then
Right.
people will have a little collection of 73 wisdoms, and then they can
Mm-hmm.
use those as a daily guide. They might pull seven for a week. They might pull one in
Right.
the morning, one in the evening. So it's
Mm-hmm.
a way, there are no hard, fast rules, but we have created a living document called Ways to Play. And we
Okay.
just launched a new website called, it's element-wisdom.com. And
Mm-hmm.
that can give people more information about what's happening with the cards. So it will complete my cycle of actually writing the cards. And then
Okay.
the next step is I'm starting to do videos of the
Okay.
cards. And so I
Mm-hmm.
know a lot of people like videos. We've just been figuring out the subtitling and how to get all the accessibility features because, we want
Right.
people to be able to easily access this. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm relatively new at video, but I think it's an important step for our times. The other thing is
Absolutely.
the wisdoms are in very short form. So what that
Mm-hmm.
also allows is somebody to sit with that and what does it mean to you? This is a
Mm-hmm.
very, very important piece of health. What is your experience? What
Mm-hmm.
does it mean when somebody tells you something? The most important thing is what is our mind, body, and spirit telling us that we can tell our provider?
Mm-hmm.
That's where we really need to start tuning in, is
Yeah.
listening to the experts for a
Mm-hmm.
certain level of guidance, but not depending on the experts to guide what's right for us. Now, believe
Right.
me, emergency medicine is so phenomenal in our country. But like on the COVID, we've missed the mark. We
Right.
don't see people that are faring well on ventilators because it's a hypoxia condition. It's an
Mhm.
inflammatory condition. And
Right.
these, we aren't looking at in the right direction. We're all scurrying around trying to use outdated protocols
Yeah.
for a for something that is presenting in a way that we're not curious about it. We're
Hmm.
not we don't, as a medical community, there's a lot of confusion, as we all know, but we're
Yeah,
learning.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the biggest problems from COVID is that it's almost like the mucus builds up and solidifies, and that causes the restriction of the airway and makes it very very difficult to breathe. I mean, I actually read an article that was published by a doctor. I don't remember his name, where he was talking about if you even think that you have COVID before you can go get tested. Things that you can do are like sipping hot tea and things like that, because the warm liquids versus the cold liquids help to break up the mucus before it can form. I totally agree with what you're saying. Now, I'm not a medical doctor in any way, shape, or form, but I've been around the health and nutrition space long enough to realize that I know enough about how the body works, and I totally agree with what you're saying. I think that they've completely kind of missed the mark on this whole thing, and they've gone
Yeah.
about things the wrong way. And the sad fact is they're not learning from their mistakes. It doesn't seem like.
Yes. And you're exactly right. It's more of a ARDS syndrome. So people basically start drowning in their mucus. But the thing
Mm-hmm.
is, we have oxygen deprivation, and the ventilators aren't working to
Mm-hmm.
oxygenate those. We have to break down the mucus. We
Mm-hmm.
have to get oxygen into the cells. And so, bronchodilators, where we can actually um, increase, and this is a very complex rendition of a virus. And I would like to also let people know that we've been living with viruses from the get go. Viruses
Yes.
are integral to our health and
Mm-hmm.
wellness. They thing that help the bacteriophages move into the cells to kill bacteria. They are
Mm-hmm.
they modify us. So, for example, sickle cell anemia, the viruses have changed the blood cells so that people are less vulnerable to sickle
Mm-hmm.
cell, to
Right.
because of the relationship with our environmental relationship with other organisms like mosquitoes and these types of things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I
Right.
think what we're missing is that a basic level of trust in the human body and our functioning immune systems. This is the
Mm-hmm.
only time I've ever seen quarantine healthy people. Like, what's the craziness there?
Right.
We have shut down the economy because we are sheltering at home people that can afford to stay at home,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the other
Right.
thing we're not doing is looking at underlying conditions. We know, for
Mm-hmm.
example, that this hits the ACE pathways, so people with pre existing diabetes and heart diseases are at risk.
Mm-hmm.
We also know
Yep.
that it affects blood clotting factors, so people that
Mm-hmm.
are vulnerable to strokes or have predispositions genetically, that our blood gets a little bit sticky, and basic health in our country is pretty poor, especially
Mm-hmm.
the so we have a very vulnerable population because we have underlying dis-ease. And there
Mm-hmm.
are, of course, outliers, but there are some people that are diagnosed healthy, but we don't know if they had a viral load of Epstein-Barr and mono, and maybe they were slightly compromised by cohabitation with rickettsia from tick diseases, how much inflammation
Mm-hmm.
do they have in their body. So there
Right.
is so much that's protective when we're well. And I have
Mm-hmm.
never ever met one person that could not improve their wellness wherever they were on the journey.
Absolutely.
Even when
Absolutely.
you're in stage, you come in
Hmm.
end stage, you can work those mental, spiritual, emotional processes that are real health. So there
Hmm.
is nowhere on our journey that we cannot be empowered. And if there is a message that's collective in the element wisdom cards, they're tidbit ways day after day
Hmm.
to empower our health, to dig deeper. They're in a snippet
Right.
form, so we
Hmm.
can contemplate them. And I ask people,
Yeah.
what does it mean to you? Before you go,
Right.
to me, what it means, what does it mean to you? And then
Hmm.
unraveling what it means from the wisdom traditions. Where did I source this information? Did it come directly from source? Did it come
Hmm.
from, a 3,000-year-old classical Chinese text? Did it come from the name of an acupuncture point? All that's very relative, but the most important thing is, how do you relate to your own health? And I do
Yeah.
believe nutritional status, how we eat, how we go around in the world, what environment we wake up in, what is our attitude when we wake up, what are the first things we do in the morning, what are the last things
Hmm.
we do at night. These translate to dis-ease or ease and flow,
Yep.
to imbalance or balance,
Hmm. Yeah.
illness or disease.
Hmm. Exactly, exactly. You know, and I really like that you use the term dis-ease, and that's a key point that I tell a lot of people that I work with. You know, people tend to pronounce that word disease. You
Mm.
know, and it's actually, when you break it down, it is dis-ease, and it's just that. Dis-ease is more than just a particular syndrome that you may be going through at a certain point in time, because like, dis-ease is more than, like, cancer is more than disease. There are things that cause that. We're born with cancer cells in our bodies. It is different environmental conditions and different choices that we've made, and things like that, that activate these cells and cause us issues. Inflammation, they're starting to recognize now, is huge in the body, and how it is so directly related to so many problems in health in today's society. And I really wanted to touch on that again, because that's something that people need to understand. Take the Z out of disease, because when you pronounce it like that, it's almost like they changed the first S to a Z, and break it down to what it is. It's dis-ease. Your body is not comfortable in the state that it's in for whatever reason, and that's something that you need to change.
That discomfort
Mm-hmm.
is the messaging from our system about what's out of balance. So
Yeah.
these symptoms are so, so, so valuable. Whether we
Mm-hmm.
have a headache, whether we have digestive problems, the
Mm-hmm.
symptom, when we cut it off or medicate out of it, we don't have a feedback system anymore. And
Right.
so honoring the symptoms versus looking at them as a annoyance to get rid of.
Mm-hmm.
Honor what's in front of us, honor the states that we're in, right?
Yeah.
Ask, be curious what they're about. So just to
Mm-hmm.
reiterate the point, absolutely.
Yeah. Yep, yep. I totally agree. Don't just try to treat the symptom. Learn from it. You're exactly right. It's right there in front of you. Examine it. Try to figure out what it is. What is that telling you about the current state of your body? Is it telling you that you need to learn to reduce stress, because stress spikes certain hormones, and these hormones cause inflammation in the body? It's all these things, and this is, we touched on it at the beginning, and I touch on it every chance I get. Everything is so greatly connected, and sometimes it can be the smallest things that we're not even thinking about that can cause us the greatest issues in the long run, for sure. Now, before we run out of time, I want to go back and touch on something. Several times throughout our conversation, you've talked about people's rhythms.
Mhm.
What are some real time examples of what it's like to live closer to your rhythms, and how do they affect or create a benefit on your health and wellness?
So, some real time examples, we gave one earlier, which is starting to wake up with the sunrises, to actually get out there and, first of all, to see them. Find a place
Mm-hmm.
nearby you where you can actually view the sunrise, where you can actually view a sunset. And then, as much as possible, waking up just before the sun comes up and watching it rise.
Mm-hmm.
It's so funny. If you're ever with a group of people watching a sunset, the most
Mm-hmm.
common experience I have is silence, because
Yeah.
we're mesmerized and we're awed.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a real time example that we can use for every season. Other examples, and I want to give you some examples for, I'll just free flow with this. Other real time examples are what you and I have done. We've made conscious choices to live in nature. And
Mm-hmm.
so, while everybody may not be making that same choice, I would invite them to figure out where their most nearby slice of nature is. Is that a city
Mm-hmm.
park? Like Portland, Oregon has the most city parks of any city in the United States, and they have trails everywhere. So, where is it that you can source out sitting by a creek, or wading in a creek or floating in a creek for the summer?
Mm-hmm.
That's really a lovely thing to do. So, sourcing out these access to nature if you're not choosing to live within nature. Putting out bird feeders so that you can actually see the winged ones and
Mm-hmm.
experience them. Just open your eyes and start looking at bird forms above you. Can you recognize by the way something flies, right? And so,
Right.
those are some ways we start connecting. Other things are, of course, this is a topic we've been on for years, but seasonal eating.
Mm-hmm.
So, some of the real examples that we could use for summer are, what are the foods that have a cooling nature in our body versus heating nature? So, for example, if we're overheating, there are one of two ways to go. One is you can actually spice it up and get your air conditioning going by sweating a lot. So, if you're out in the national forest, if you eat something spicy, you'll sweat faster, like ginger or cinnamon. We
Mm-hmm.
also may want to cool ourselves, so drinking teas and eating foods that have more of a cooling affinity, like the
Mm-hmm.
mint family, peppermint cooling,
Mm-hmm.
food, cucumbers cooling. So
Yes.
infuse water overnight with cucumbers and mint is something that I did this weekend. And it
Mm.
was just so refreshing to have that herbal infused. I drink almost all my waters room temperature. I don't drink cold things
Mm-hmm.
because they shock. And starting to live closer to nature, like cold water is shocking. And we can use
Yeah.
that to our benefit if we want to take a cold plunge in an icy cold river on a hot day. So,
Right.
kind of starting to connect with the thermal nature, the
Mm-hmm.
what it does to us in our body when we go on a vacation to a very arid area. Do we feel better in our bodies? Maybe we
Mm-hmm.
do, because we've accumulated dampness because we've been living in a damp area.
Right.
Also,
Right.
food create dampening effects like dairy, animal products, oil, super oily nut butters. Too much of these create
Mm-hmm.
dampness in our body. And so,
Right.
finding when we are in a dry environment, or when we go into a sauna versus a steam room, like
Mm-hmm.
what does that do for us? So, I'm really breaking it down to the elements of the rhythms. Like,
Right.
can we observe ourselves when
Mm-hmm.
we're in different experiences? How do we feel when we're exposed to a draft of wind or a draft of cold? What does stop? What does that do
Mm-hmm.
to us? So, I think
Right.
observation is probably the first thing, is being curious, and also
Mm-hmm.
allowing ourselves to take the judgment out of it. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay, that's what it's doing. And also noticing it has a beginning and middle and an end. My experience with a cold plunge. What
Mm-hmm.
does it feel like before? Probably a lot of apprehension. What does it feel like when we're doing it? Very
Mm-hmm.
vitalizing. While we're in
Yes.
it, and then afterwards. So kind of breaking
Mm-hmm.
ourselves down to a like slowing the movie down. Like, what is it
Mm-hmm.
frame by frame? Be
Right.
very curious. And then
Mm-hmm.
in terms of, real time examples, we can always look at our food. We can always
Mm-hmm.
look at the beverages that we're taking in and asking
Mm-hmm.
ourselves, what is the most important thing in that season? So,
Right.
like we're saying, working on our heart health, our
Mm-hmm.
circulation, our circulatory health during the summer, learning how to laugh. I mean, let's take the summer and imbibe it with some humor, right?
Yeah.
Watch some comedies, hang out with people that make you laugh, read jokes, read the comic strips. How do we take a minute and create some rise? So the fire is all about the upward expression and the full expression of life. Like, what is a rose in full bloom? Take a
Mm-hmm.
moment, smell it.
Yeah.
So getting closer to the rhythms first requires noticing and engaging with them and heightening our consciousness, and then stopping and allowing ourselves to reset our brains. We're
Mm-hmm.
often going from one experience to the next experience to the next one, next one, next one. But if we can pause after we smell the rose
Mm-hmm.
and just take 3 deep breaths and know we just had an incredible experience and fully, in the spirit of summer, fully blossom in the experience and then the afterglow of that experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's like it's kind of crazy being in nature. Just like right now, I've got a fly buzzing around my head. um, but it's simple things like that. Even it's like I'm sitting here in my office, and it's not like my office is outdoors or anything. But because I live in the country, flies in my house is one of the things that I deal with, and it's like just being even though I'm involved in shooting this podcast with you, it's like just being conscious. And if the fly lands on the back of my head, I notice it. I can feel him moving, and then it's being able to tap into stuff like that that I think is really really beneficial for a lot of people for sure. So
It's,
now,
tap, it's tapping in and then trusting, because we also
yeah,
have that imbalance where
hmm,
we hyper focus on everything and everything's a problem,
yeah,
right? And so
yep,
it's how to experience and trust without judgment the
hmm,
experience that you're in the moment. And then if
yep,
we have a history of being fearful, literally, it's okay.
hmm,
It's okay. I'm
yep,
okay right now.
absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Well, before I let you go, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you on social media and whatnot if they want to reach out and contact you?
I am on Instagram at Dr. Sarita Cox, Alberta Orchard Wellness, and Dr. Sarita Elizabeth on Facebook. We
Okay.
also have our Alberta Orchard Wellness there, and we have a brand new website I'd love for you to check out. It's element with a dash wisdom.com. That will let you know about the Element Wisdom cards, and also Dr. Sarita Elizabeth is more about me. So if you want to learn about me, and I'm going to link those soon, but that's our new project, and those are the ways to find
Awesome.
us.
Awesome. That is fantastic. Dr. Cox, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to come on the show and share your wisdom with us. I learned so much from everybody that I talk to because I talk to such a wide variety of people. Um, I do that number one because I'm always learning myself. I believe we're never at the end of our journey when it comes to learning more about ourselves. And, that's one of the reasons I started the podcast, was to not only continue my education, but to share that with my audience as well. So I want to thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for doing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Okay, sit tight. I'm going to wrap this up real quick, and then I'll be right back, and we'll say goodbye.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, this was an amazing episode. So many interesting things. I'm looking forward to taking her test and getting my hands on some of those cards and checking that stuff out. I will link all of her stuff again in the show notes, so be sure to check those out. Guys, if you got value out of this, which I know you did, do me a favor, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, like it, share it with a friend. So that way we can just continue to move things on, and I can continue to bring you more and more guests. Until I see you again, you guys know my motto: playtime's over. It's time to go to work.